to hear from our scribes and monitors.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Swanson, and I was charged with question number 3, the grandfathering. Should the city execute grandfathering? What should it include and what should it exclude? So this is a very brief summary of what they said. Everybody had a lot of good input. Overall, grandfathering is good as long as there are conditions, particularly regarding life safety issues. There needs to be more specific clarification of the term of grandfathering. Public education was a big issue. There was also a lot of fear of older houses having to come up to current code, so obviously that goes hand in hand with the education. People would prefer private inspections instead of city inspections. There was a lot of concern about the cost of grandfathering, the permits, and there should be city assistance for some of that. Permits are often unaffordable. Codes need to be revised if possible. We know they can't all be revised to reflect the current economy. This is especially true for senior citizens and struggling families. The definition of substandard, is that the same as unpermitted? There was also concern that when inspectors go into a building to inspect a permitted item, that they not look at other items or issues that they could see, that they need to inspect specific items. Does grandfathering go along with the sale of a house? If a property is grandfathered, do the new owners get to maintain that? There needs to be a review of the necessity of permits for maintenance items. Grandfather lot lines and setbacks. If not up to current code, they may not qualify for a new mortgage or a reverse mortgage, particularly of concern to senior citizens. And it also affects insurance rates. And grandfather if it is safe for the neighbors. And of course the biggest thing, safety, safety, safety. And that was it.
Thank you.
I'm Roger Case, Steve Brigham. We were charged with the idea of a positive impact, providing the best positive impact to the community. Excuse me, that's right, economic impact. I left out one important word. And what we found was the best way to delineate that was to separate it into 2 columns. One, the positive impacts that grandfathering would have, and the positive impacts that the present system would have. And then at the bottom was dealing with one of the questions about fees. So this is sort of a summary of the groups. We had a lot of good input from the tables, but this sort of gives a pretty good summary of what was put down. Under grandfathering, we had saves the owner money. We have it saves the architectural and historic sites. It helps with hardship situations. It eliminates inspectors and the permit process and code enforcement. It provides cheap housing. This was a comment they want to go back to the 1937 codes with only 100 pages, and I think what they're referring to is to simplify the code process. The negative impact is it may force demolition of the property, and by permitting the use of photos, it's possible to run a no-fee permit process. And the last point under grandfathering was that it should take into consideration each individual person. On the present system, we have that the present system is only for the government in terms of raising money. 2, that promotes health and safety.
This is my favorite.
Yeah, this is, and Steve, would you like to give this one?
Sure, I'll do this. This is my favorite. The present system is about 10% for your safety and 9% BS.
What does BS stand for?
The last on this was that you get more for your house in terms of price if it's up to code. And then finally, the last point that was made is that almost every table felt very strongly that fees should be made on a sliding scale. So that's our report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Andrew says BS stands for Building Safety.
My name's Sherry Cash. I'm on the collaborative. I'm a stakeholder on the collaborative representing homeless people. I want to conserve housing. And this is Sue Everett. She's with the Housing Authority.
I'm Devin Niemer, property owner.
I'm Heather Miller. Okay, we had the question, why don't community members pull permits? And we condensed some of this down. We will be saving everybody. Save all of your papers and stack them on the table over there with the number of the question on top and what your name is if you worked on that issue. The fines are too high. We had that several times that the fines are way too high. And the correction time is too short. And people said they have no knowledge of the permits that are required, but also people had mentioned that staff sometimes would say different things, depending on who you would talk to at the counter on a different day. There's a fear of being cited for other issues. So if you have someone come to look at a water heater or a faucet or a toilet, there's a big fear that it might open Pandora's box and there'll be a lot of other things that you have to take care of and you're not really sure if you have the money to do it. And it's scary for people. There's resentment of government interface and privacy rights. So sometimes people will come home from work and their kids have let somebody come into the house and they didn't know what happened and there's this whole can of worms that they have to handle. So our privacy rights is important.
I actually wanted to add to that. A lot of people have more of an issue not just with them coming in their house, but that they have the authority to dictate what you can and should do within your house, that they shouldn't have the authority to do that. That's a big issue I saw a lot.
So there's also issues with consistent enforcement. It doesn't seem to be consistent. We could go in one time and learn one thing and then we learn something else. So depending on the interpretation by staff, it can be different. So if there could be a way where we can, leave it a little more open to discover information that we don't know together and make it the same for everybody. Inconvenient cost and time stops the workflow. Some cities are able to stamp in one day a permit, but it could take years and years here sometimes. There's no benefit to having a permit. People can get away with it. So if you can get away with it, we do. And maybe that has to be looked at if there's a more consistent way of applying it, code enforcement. Let's see. Oh, bad experiences in the past. People have had bad experiences and they don't realize how much we're working in the city to improve these customer service relations. So we just say forget it and don't go back for another permit the next time. And then we have solutions, which is the page I love. Okay, solutions. No enforcement at all on non-safety issues. And we already heard today from Andrew that sometimes, faucets aren't really, looked at that much. How much can you really do? So that could be something that we could apply to everything.
And the argument part of that I got from a lot of people is, earlier, I think his name was Andrew, was talking about how there's certain things that they can do with the city, there's certain things they can do with the state, and there's certain things that are done at the federal level. But the issue I think a lot of people have had is, should the city enforce it even though the state's requiring it? And that I think is an issue that I saw a lot of people say, as far as, that whole mentality of just leave me alone, don't enforce it even though the state says you have to.
We could have online tutorials on how to pull permits and what needs a permit with a toll-free hotline number. And also retailers could provide permit requirement information when you buy a faucet or you buy something that needs a permit. A little slip goes in the bag and you're responsible. It's very much like the one that's already been provided for us today. city certified contractors who issue on-site permits. So there was the idea that maybe contractors or repairmen and workers could certify themselves with the city for something that's easy, cost that's easy, $1,500 a year, and that way they're known to be reliable, to get back to the city, and on site when that water heater or that work is done, a box is checked and it's included in your fee for the installation. Convenience, convenience and inexpensive. That would help if the fees could be reduced, fear of high fees, if it was convenient to take care of it, and on-site inspector permits, where the inspectors on site just permit it instead of going back to building safety back and forth and back and forth. Staff should be more courteous and more user-friendly. Third-party consultant to prioritize required compliance. So a third party, someone that we could hire or that can let us know how our project will be mapped out so that our fears will be lessened.
Someone who's a city employee.
Right. And we talked about ombudsman, someone that would be an ombudsman in the city to help people with, if they don't have a computer, can use possibly a computer at the city or at the library and help someone get information that they need. Or we make it real courteous and friendly, like the CIT training that the police officers have, that you speak to people civilly and you help them with their problem and you meet that person on the level of their knowledge, not what you assume they already know.
And CIT is?
Crisis intervention training. It's actually used for people with mental illness with the police department. So instead of flaring and enticing this, emotional rise in a person, people are calm. I've used that same CIT training at the emergency hospital when I help homeless people, and they're really inflating the issue until I said, "Do you have a CIT trained doctor?" And everybody just starts calming down and saying, "What do you need? I'll help you." And that's what we need sometimes, because that counter can be crazy. And if we know how to just repeat like a robot, "Oh, I know, you're not feeling heard, and it makes the person just more angry and it's more crazy making. So we have to really look at, what do we think that person needs that's part of our community, that's our citizen, and that has a right and pays taxes? What do they need? If they are acting crazy at the counter and it's that person's fault, you can say, "Oh, there's an ombudsman you can go see." You could shift it over to somebody whose duty is to, calm people down.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to re-emphasize that because in the last several months that we've been working on this, and many of you realize it's a very emotional issue. And even on our committee, we're trying to keep people from going to blows. It's very, very emotional. And so there needs to be something very intentional about keeping everybody calm. It's about safety issues. There are options, there are ways to get this done. It's for the benefit of us all. So I'm very impressed with the input that we've received. The next person is?
Jerry Breiner.
Barbara Marcus O'Neill, and I'm part of the coalition.
Sonia Croft, and I'm also part of the committee.
Jonelle McLean, and I'm a real estate broker and a property owner and a intern native.
Our question, we had two. What causes fear and what can reduce fear? So what we found was it's the unknown. What else will be found when you're getting a permit, for one thing? So there are no limitations when people come into your home. And inconsistency. What is the cost going to be to me as an individual? How much time is it going to take to resolve it? The complexity of the language and the regulations and the requirements and the codes. They're written at a level where you need to have a college degree or be a lawyer. So they'd like to have that written in a way that people can understand. Also, unknowns are the regulations. What are they? And what do we do about them? Another perspective was some people felt that when people came into their homes, that it was like commando raids or the Gestapo. That there's an inconsistency of inspectors and codes, that there's a feeling of invasiveness, policing policy, selective enforcement, staff responses are inconsistent, the attitude of the staff is inconsistent, service of staff is inconsistent, and intimidation and threats are what one feels. There's also a subjectivity of inspectors and codes. We also did hear with the inconsistencies of staff that there were also some good experiences from people who went in to talk to city. So it was both perspectives. There is fear of retribution from city, landlords, neighbors, alternatives for housing on part of the people, and there's no place for them to go. They feel that if something were happening where they have to move out of their place, that there is no place that they could go to move. Another unknown is when somebody is buying a piece of property, that they may not have the history of the property or the permitting that is required. Another thing we heard is that there are horror stories out there. So they almost become like urban legends. So you hear one thing and you don't know, is that true? And so then pretty soon it kind of like spreads that it becomes like truth, and maybe it isn't. So there's a lack of information. Also, who has the authority? Also, there's a feeling of government intrusion in lives, that there's often an unreasonable and there's complication in the way some of the forms are written. There is no differentiation between minor and major violations. There are too many rules. Lack of consistency between county and city health codes. What is the motivation on the city's part? Is it money or safety? Is it empire building? Can't get info without being under the gun. Lack of trust, it becomes them versus us. City doesn't reflect the community needs. Another word like, is there a need for affordable housing? Also the definition of what is safety.
That's
So-
the reason I left it out of pitch.
Oh, okay. So there were some really good solutions. What we wanted to do was really stimulate people when they had something that they said that was an issue, that they also had an opportunity to think within themselves, what would be a viable solution? So we really wanted to encourage a solution to the problem. Some of the solutions: no fees for grandfathering except for safety, a limited scope for the inspections, enforce accountability of contractors, know your rights, use of advocates, speak up. These are some of the ways that information could be put out to the community through print, through interviews, like the forms that are passed out today, the surveys, public forums, ombudsman or neutral parties. We heard this a number of times. 800 number, online information. So there are various ways that information could be put out into the community. No fees except for safety issues, simplify the building code, be reasonable, keep inspectors in check, who is watching over them, so really having somebody in place to do that. The importance of honesty, transparency with city staff. There was one suggestion, or actually there were a few people who said to reduce the city staff and really have the community take part more in what's happening. Complaint-based inspections only. That code enforcement be a not-for-profit endeavor. That it would be important to have a sliding scale. There were some people who were saying that when there are fees that are imposed, what happens is it could take half of their Social Security benefits that they're getting, and so that it would be really important to pay attention to that and to really look at seniors and to help them in any way that can be done. We also had CIT training for city staff, and also that it was really important to have respect for individuals, to remove the policing, to have consistent enforcement, to have a cap on fines. And then we had another one that was interesting. We had a split opinion on this. Some people said, you know, when I report somebody, I want to know that I am going to be anonymous in this so that there isn't any retaliation. We also heard, if somebody reports me, I want to know who they are. So, I mean, there's both thinking. Not that one is right or the other, but just to show that when you have a diverse group, you're going to have diverse opinion. Also, there was said that it would be really important if there could be an opportunity for the public to have an interaction with City Council that was a dialogue, not just them sitting up there and you're up there for 5 minutes to say what you want to say, but to actually be able to have a community and City Council dialogue that really was mediated.
Most of our question here was, what are the causes and the cures for unsafe conditions? We have a lot of causes. Most of the cures have already been repeated because, you know, some of the cures are probably common to many of the problems, but some of the causes were expense and time of getting permits, lack of funds. Two of my favorites, age and deferred maintenance. By those standards, I probably have a few unpermitted conditions myself here and need to go see a doctor. We have poor health of owners who it may impede their ability to take care of and properly maintain their property. And then also different aesthetic standards of what constitutes, what properties ought to look like. So some of the cures, obviously many of the same people had the same input. So we had, informational material at the point of sale for a place like Lowe's or Home Depot that could include permit information or even forms, or the permit fee included in it if they were going to install it in the city of Ventura. Better city guidelines for reasons for permits and codes that people understand what the importance is. Possibly financial assistance for low-income residents. Again, the idea of a third-party ombudsman that the private individual could hire to help them navigate the process, or maybe somebody that was certified by the city. A streamlined permit process, probably starting the process online. Another cause, which is really was one thing that was brought up, is things that are considered unsafe now, whereas they were previously considered perfectly safe, and maybe we shouldn't be looking at those so hard. And possibly maybe some city-sponsored volunteer programs, that would use city core or faith-based